Let's open our Bibles to Ecclesiastes chapter 10 this evening. Ecclesiastes 10. Excuse me. We'll start there with the very first verse. It says, "Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savour. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honour. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Yea, also when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to every one that he is a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offences. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth." Stop right there. These ideas, or these maxims, are almost completely disconnected from one another. And like many verses in the book of Proverbs, they constitute a series of standalone ideas or standalone thoughts that should be considered. And from verse 1 comes the expression that there's a fly in the ointment. Everyone's probably heard that in some way, much as other phrases like there's a catch in that somewhere, or there's a catch in the deal, or there's something rotten in Denmark, phrases like that. And there's where that phrase, the fly in the ointment, is derived. Here, the fly lands in the ointment and dies, thus corrupting the ointment as its body decays in the ointment. And he adds, "So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor." Someone who otherwise was known for decency and honesty ends up ruining his career, his reputation, by a little folly in judgment. And in America, it's especially true if you profess to be a white Christian conservative citizen. That's about it. If you fit any of those categories, you're the enemy. You're to blame for everyone else's misfortune. And the news media in this country loves dead flies, and so they're going to magnify your lapse in judgment, your error, your flaw, your fault, something that you did, that they all do too, but you just happen to get caught doing it, and kind of like the politicians in these campaigns right now. But they set out to magnify the one moment that in life that you made a bad decision, and then yell, "Hypocrite, hypocrite, hypocrisy." Meanwhile, people who make no profession of faith in God, they don't believe in virtue, they don't believe in decency or morality. When was the last time anybody on the left in this country invoked the Constitution of this country as the reason why they believe in certain things? It doesn't happen. Never mind invoking the Bible, unless they're going to twist some scripture to suggest God would. I saw some that was an article or a news article yesterday on the internet, and they asked the question, who would Jesus vote for? Well, first of all, you don't bring the Son of God down to the level of American politics. Every knee is going to bow to him one day. He's no one that worries about that, such things as that. But these people who make no profession to believe in decency or morality or virtue or God or the Scriptures or salvation or the need for regeneration, they make no profession of those things. They hold up those kinds of people are held up as heroes. People, the rest of us are supposed to emulate and imitate. Think of President John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King Jr. two of the most raunchy, fornicating men in American history. And yet, rather than their careers going down the tubes, they were deified by the news media. Those are the gods of most liberal Americans today. They don't believe in the God of the Bible. They believe in the gods of the news media. Whoever the news media tells them to worship, that's who they worship. And rather than being they turn these people into saints of virtue and standards of goodness and kindness and purity, when they might have been just the exact opposite of it. And it would take a week to list all the cases where a little bit of folly ruined someone's reputation, ruined the life of, so caused it to stink. And the modern world seems to love the smell of dead flies, however, and they can't seem to get enough of it. David's folly in his lifetime, it was in 2 Samuel 11, and the sin with Bathsheba. And that was long remembered after his death. And Abraham's fly in the ointment was when he didn't trust God. He went to Egypt and told his wife Sarah, "Say that thou art my sister, and it will be well with me," in Genesis 12:13. And the dead fly in Daniel's ointment was when he let a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar, bow down and worship him in Daniel chapter 2, and he didn't correct Nebuchadnezzar. He let it happen. That was a sin. The only one who could allow people to bow down and worship him and not need to correct them was the Son of God, was the Lord Jesus Christ. Verse 2 in our text, "A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left." Traditionally, in any country, the right hand is the hand of power. Go forward quickly to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, and begin there at verse 32. Here Peter is preaching, and he says, "This Jesus hath God raised up, whereof we are all witnesses. Therefore, being by the right hand of God exalted, and having received of the Father the promise of the Holy Ghost, he hath shed forth this, which ye now see and hear. For David is not ascended into the heavens, but he saith himself, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand." Stay with me just for a minute. I want you to consider the expression southpaw. Not the right hand, but the left hand. A southpaw. A paw belongs to an animal, and all cats have paws. Leopards and lions are cats. Devils likened unto a roaring lion, 1 Peter 5:8, and the man of sin is likened to a leopard, Revelation 13. And he is thus a cat man, not Batman, but cat man. Think of a sphinx. Remember the big image of the sphinx in Egypt by the pyramids. There's a face of a man, the body of a cat. And the approach to God in the tabernacle and later in the temple, when they set it up, and you've read it as you read through the Old Testament, the entrance was on the east side, and you entered in and went from the east entrance and walked westward towards the laver of water and the altar of burnt offering, and then into the tabernacle. And the God's movement in patterns has been from west, or from the east to the west. And the sun moves from the east to the west every day. And something else I was thinking of. World history has been traveling westward since the New Testament times. All the action was there in Israel and Syria, and then all the action, all the attention began to move westward as Paul traveled throughout the Mediterranean, preaching to Corinth and to Galatia, and as far away as Rome, towards the end of his ministry. Everything moved westward. And all the world's events have been playing out and centered in certain countries and gradually moving westward till now it's come all the way back around the world again. And all the focus of the daily news is there in the Middle East and Iraq and over to Israel once again. A man facing westward would have the south to his left. And the son of perdition, so his left hand would be, if he were a cat, that would be his south paw. You follow me? I think you're still with me. And the man of sin, the son of perdition, is said to have a bad right arm. I'll show you the verse for that. Zechariah 11. Zechariah 11. And notice there, verse 17. Zechariah 11, verse 17. Woe unto the idol, I-D-O-L, shepherd, that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. And there's a similar verse in Isaiah 48. Isaiah 48, verse 25 says, The horn of Moab is cut off, and his arm is broken, saith the Lord. So the son of perdition has a bad right arm. He will have to rule with his left hand, his south paw. All of that is sort of pieced together, bit by bit, here and there, from the Bible, without having to run to any other reference work. I find it very interesting that in the verse in front of us, wisdom goes to the right and foolishness goes to the left. In this country, we have, in politics, we have the right versus the left. Or as I would call it, the right versus the wrong. And people on the right still believe in God. They still believe that the founders were onto something when they conceived this new nation. They still believe that the Constitution is the best document of governance under which any people have ever lived. They want to abide by it and live as close to it as possible. Do you realize you don't have to be a lawyer to be nominated for the Supreme Court? That's not in the Constitution. All of the justices have been lawyers, but it's not in the Constitution. And the founders believed if there were justices or judges who had the good testimony of their fellow citizens, they had a good reputation for being God-fearing and moral and upright, and no one could find any embarrassing and disgracing flaw with them, that if they were upright in character, all they needed to do was take the Constitution as it was written, and with the good sense that God gave to them by church and informed by preaching in the Scriptures, they would be able to handle any case that was brought before them. You don't have to be an attorney to do that. You have to be an attorney to come up with gay marriage and come up with abortion and come up with so many other things. But so you don't have to be in. But all of those people who believe in the simple virtues of our country based in the preaching of the Scriptures are all on the right. You would never hear someone on the left invoke the Constitution, or certainly not invoke the Word of God as the basis for anything that they believe in. On the other hand, you hear them utter a lot of things that are the words of fools, foolishness. Now look there at verse 3. Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. The things that they celebrate, the things that they're proud of, announce they haven't got a lick of sense at all. Let's protect the American people by disarming them all. That makes no sense whatsoever. Let's even everything out by taking from the ultra wealthy and giving it to those who are without. So everyone's equal. Yeah, let's take it from the guy that earned it and give it to the person that didn't earn it. How is that fair? Let's give everybody a cell phone that these people here pay for, these people here don't pay for. If you can't afford it, you don't get to have it. I can't afford a house at the beach, I don't get to live in one right now. Maybe next year I will, but not right now. If you can't afford it, you don't get to have it. And if you're not a citizen, those of us who are citizens aren't obligated to pay for it for you. I remember about 7, 8 years ago, they were pushing these energy-saving light bulbs. You know, if all of us switched these new energy-saving bulbs, it would be the equivalent of taking 400,000 cars off of our roads in energy savings. And I remember telling someone at my job, if we deported everybody that doesn't belong here and is here without permission, we will actually take 400,000 cars off of our roads, maybe more than that. But that falls under the heading of common sense, and that's why none of the lawmakers are going to engage in it. Down there in San Diego, or not San Diego, but before you get there, Carlsbad, maybe it's Carl. They built a water desalination plant that opened almost a year ago, about 10 months ago. They'll take water out of the ocean, take the salt out of it, and pump 50 million gallons of clean water to San Diego County every day. It cost $1 billion to construct this plant. And I thought, well, why don't we put about 8 or 9 of those up and down the coast of California? Instead, let's waste money on a high-speed train that nobody's going to ride. People like their cars. It gives them a sense of independence and go where they want, when they want. I don't want to have to wait for your train schedule to take me somewhere where I'm going to have to transfer to a bus or somewhere else. But that falls under the heading of common sense and good judgment, and they're not going to engage in it. But things like, we don't believe in God, we don't believe in creation, we believe in evolution, that all happened by itself. Any intelligent purpose behind it. This is how we ended up. We believe that man is using too much hairspray and therefore he's warming up the climate around the world. Well, when they couldn't find any evidence for the world getting warmer, they changed the terms to climate change, which is very open-ended. How's it changing? Getting hotter or colder? Or it's not going sideways. But it's insane. Rather than admit they were wrong about something, let's just repeat it even more and add more frivolity to it. We believe that men and women are exactly the same. You couldn't be more idiotic in saying something like that. Men and women are not the same. If a boy wants to be a girl, let him be a girl. If a girl wants to be a boy, let her be a boy. That is absolute insanity. Let's suppose we had 100 people in the room tonight. We don't, but let's suppose we had 100 people, 50 men and 50 women. And I were to say, all right, all the men get on that side of the room, all the women get on that side of the room, and when I say go, I want you to duke it out, fist to fist, and see whether the men or the women are left standing. You say, well, there's a woman as a bouncer in Chicago at a bar, and she can handle this. Those are rare exceptions. Are we even sure she's a woman? But you know, you get the general point. The fool who runs to the left is insane. He's absolutely insane. I like what Michael Savage wrote a book several years ago called Liberalism is a Mental Disorder. I think he's right. I think he's right. I don't want to get off on that. But they announce to everyone that they're fools by the things they stand up for. We believe in homosexual marriage. We believe that we're born this way. How could you be born that way? You know, to say that I was born that way would be to indict my ancestors before me. Somehow their genetics caused me to turn out this way. I don't know that your parents or your grandparents would appreciate that remark. And if it's genetic, then by definition, when you die, the gene is going to die with you, because you don't reproduce. This idea that it's all passed on genetic, no, it's not. And there have been numerous very well-researched and very thorough studies to debunk this idea that anyone's born that way, and yet we're going to insist upon it. If you believe that the courts or the school systems, they say we should not teach just one theory of origins, especially if that's the theory of creationism. So, but if it's evolution, then that one theory is allowed. That's the only one we want to hear about. And they're the ones that want to call Christians hypocrites from time to time, for one reason or another. Wisdom, as verse 2, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. He also, when he that is a fool walketh by the ways, wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. Verse 4, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. The classic case this verse would apply to would be the case of Shimei. If you run back to 1 Kings chapter 2. 1 Kings chapter 2. And beginning there at verse 36. And the king sent and called for Shimei, and said unto him, build thee an house in Jerusalem, and dwell there, and go not forth thence any whither. For it shall be that on the day thou goest out, and passest over the brook Kidron, thou shalt know for certain that thou shalt surely die. Thy blood shall be upon thine own head. Shimei said unto the king, the saying is good. As my lord the king hath said, so will thy servant do. Shimei dwelt in Jerusalem many days. And it came to pass, at the end of 3 years, that 2 of the servants of Shimei ran away unto Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And they told Shimei, saying, behold, thy servants be in Gath. Shimei arose and saddled his ass, and went to Gath to Achish to seek his servants. Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath. And it was told Solomon that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath, and was come again. And the king sent and called for Shimei, and said unto him, did I not make thee to swear by the Lord, and protested unto thee, saying, know for certain on the day thou goest out, and walkest abroad anywhither, that thou shalt surely die? And thou saidst unto me, the word that I have heard is good. Why then hast thou not kept the oath of the Lord, and the commandment that I have charged thee with? And the king said moreover to Shimei, thou knowest all the wickedness which thine heart is privy to, that thou didst to David my father. Therefore the Lord shall return thy wickedness upon thine own head. And this man was an antagonist of King David all of his life, and when he was on his dying bed, he told Solomon to treat him as he needs to be treated. And Solomon gave him a chance to save his own life by saying, dwell in Jerusalem, but stay in Jerusalem. I don't want to hear that you left the city for any reason. And he did so 3 years later, and so Solomon was now free and clear to punish him as he swore he would punish him. And verses 5 and 6 in our text, let me turn back there. Hold on here. One of those days where your fingers aren't working. Okay. Verses 5 and 6. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. Think of some event like the Academy Awards or the Grammys, or some UN General Assembly, or even a Catholic Vatican Church Council. People who are bloated and degenerate, fornicating, lying, Bible-rejecting, anti-Semitic, God-denying drunkards and drug users are recognized at events like that. They're applauded, they're celebrated, they're all dressed up looking refined and dignified, and what they have to say is actually taken seriously when not one of them is worthy of that kind of honor. That's about it. He says there in verse 6, folly is set in great dignity. They make the Academy Awards to look like the most important event to take place of the century. And all they're doing is celebrating debauchery and fornication and drunkenness and murder and mayhem and every other filthy theme that's been artistically portrayed. You know, give awards to the best camera work, the best production staff, and then the lesser knowns, they have their own award ceremonies of makeup and special effects and stuntmen and all that. They get their special ceremonies too. And all it is a collective attempt to promote degeneracy in society. But they look dignified and refined, and not a single one of them is refined or dignified. And the same thing goes for the United Nations General Assembly. Every time they criticize something the United States does, or condemn Israel time after time after time for something they've done, the UN helped to create the State of Israel. And they've spent the last 70-some years criticizing Israel for the things they do then. And then also verse 6 says, when the rich sit in a low place, it is also folly. Look at one text, Luke 14. Luke 14. Luke 14, and start there, if you will, at verse 8. Luke 14, verse 8, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, give this man place. And thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, friend, go up higher. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. So don't assume that you belong at the top of the food chain. Take the humble place that you might be exalted in due time. And then lastly, verse 7. And we turn again. Verse 7. I have seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. The rich, of verse 6, are also the wealthy princes alluded to, verse 7, who should be given the chief seats, but instead they are walking to the feast rather than being driven by a servant. And in modern life, sometimes the least qualified person gets the promotion, while someone who ought to have it is passed over because of some bias or prejudice on the part of the one doing with the decision-making powers. Think of someone who had absolutely no qualifications, very little experience to run for president. You say, well, right now Mr. Trump has never been elected anything. No, but he's actually run companies and he's created thousands of jobs for people. You can debate whether they're the best jobs, working in casinos and so. Hey, you go through life, you do a lot of things you'd rather not do to put food on the table sometimes. And he's created more jobs than the federal government has. He's created more jobs than Hillary Clinton has. He created more jobs than President Obama ever created. In fact, we don't know that President Obama ever had a job. Say, well, wasn't he head of a Harvard Law Review or something? Yeah, but we don't know that. They've never produced one student who could testify and say, he was my instructor in law school. And I'm glad I sat under it. They've never produced one student to give a testimonial of him. They say he did, but they've never given any evidence of it. So somebody who had a wafer-thin resume, he got elected to the U.S. Senate by having what was that other candidate's name that was running? Disqualified for some reason. Anyway, yeah, he got elected to the state senate, and then the U.S. Senate, through some chicanery, getting his opponent disqualified for some minor technicality. So he basically walked into the office, and he was there for about 6 months and decided he's ready to run for president of the United States. And all of his friends were domestic terrorists. His name sounds like he could have been the 20th hijacker on 9/11 that got away. And but you and I talk that way, and somehow we're the enemies, we're the bad people. It's like the saying, "The emperor has no clothes," that old legend. You know, everybody's pretending, telling the emperor he looks great, and one kid sees the truth here. He's not wearing anything. He says the emperor has no clothes. He spilled the beans, and the illusion was over with. When you tell the truth, sometimes they don't like it. And sometimes those who are the least qualified, they should be the servants. They are elevated to places of honor, and those who rightfully have earned the right to be in the decision-making place come on the losing end.